General History of Africa. Methodology and African Prehistory. UNESCO General History of Africa. Volume I Methodology and African Prehistory Editor J. K. Serbo Volume II Ancient Civilizations of Africa Editor G. Mokhtar Volume III Africa from the 7th to the 11th Century Editor M. LFAC Assistant Editor IHRB Volume IV Africa from the 12th to the 16th Century Editor D.T.9 Volume V Africa from the 16th to the 18th Century Editor B. 8. Ogot Volume VI Africa in the 19th Century until the 1880s Editor JFAJ Volume VII Africa under Colonial Domination, 1880 to 193 5 Editor 8. 8. Bohan Volume VII Africa since 1935 Editor 8. 8. Masrui Assistant Editor C. 1 G. UNESCO International Scientific Committee for the Drafting of a General History of Africa. General History of Africa. Methodology and African Prehistory Editor J. KZRBO. Heinemann CALIFORN IAUNESCO. First published 1981 by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, 7 Place D. Fonte, 75,700 Paris and Heinemann Educational Books Limited 22 Bedford Square, London sub 3HH. Reprinted in 1992 and 1995 by Heinemann Educational Publishers, a division of Heinemann Publishers Oxford Limited, Holly Court, Jordan Hill, Oxford Box 28 EJ. Reprinted in 2000 by UNESCO Publishing 1 Rue Miolis, 75,732 Paris Edex 15, France PMB 5205, Biba.po Box 10,103, Village Post Office, Gaborone, Florence, Prague, Paris, Madrid, Athens, Melbourne, Johannesburg, Auckland, Singapore, Tokyo, Chicago, Sao Paulo. First published 1981 in the United States of America by the University of California Press 2223 Fulton Street, Berkeley, California 94720. United States of America. Copyright UNESCO 198 I. Heinemann Publishers ISBN 0435-94807-5 Cast ISBN 0435-94808 3 Paper UNESCO ISBN 9231-101-707-1 University of California Press ISBN 0520-03912-2 LCN 78-57321. Film set in IIPV Monophoto Airtart by Northumberland Press Limited, Gateshead, Tyne and Where. Contents: List of figures IX, List of plates XI, List of tables XV, Preface XVIIM ADOU, MBHTRMBOW, Director General of UNESCO. Description of the project XXIIIPA. OGOT, President of the International Scientific Committee for the Drafting of a General History of Africa. A note on chronology XXVII. General Introduction JKI. ZRBOI. The Development of African Historiography 25. Charles D. FAG2. The Place of History in African Society 43. BOUBOUHM and JKZRBO3. Recent Trends in African Historiography and Their Contribution to History in General 50. For PD. Curtain for Sources and Specific Techniques Used in African History. General Outline 72 TOBE and GA5. Written Sources Before the 15th Century 87 HDJAIV 6. Written Sources from the 15th Century onwards 114 IHRDEK 7. Oral Tradition and Its Methodology 142 Charles VNSIN. The 8. The Living Tradition 166 AHAM PAD BA 9. African Archaeology and Its Techniques including Dating Techniques 206 ZISK and ERV. Contents: File History and Linguistics 233 p. DIAGNE. Editorial Note: Theories on the Races and History of Africa 261 Charles K. I. ZRBO. 11 Migrations and Ethnic and Linguistic Differentiations 271 BOLDEROGGE. 12 African Linguistic Classification 292 Charles H. Greenberg. Appendix to Chapter 12. The Language and the P of Africa 390 LB. 13 Historical Geography, Physical Aspects 316 SDIARA. 14 Historical Geography, Economic Aspects 333 ALMABOGUNJ. 15 The interdisciplinary methods adopted in this study 348 Charles K. I. ZRBO. 16 Chronological Framework, African pluvial and glacial epochs 359 Part IR. Said Part IIH. FURE. 17 Hominization, General Problems 400 Part IY. COPPENS Part IIL. BLOUT. 18 African Fossil MBN 437 Arley Key. 19 The Prehistory of East Africa 451 Giles E.G. Sutton. 20 Prehistory in Southern Africa 487 Giles D. Clark. 21 The Prehistory of Central Africa 530 Part IR E.E. Bell D.S.H.E.R.M.B.N.S. Part I.I.F.V.D.N. and O.T.D.N. with the collaboration of P.D. Morat, J. Myersons, K. Muya and E. Roche. V.I. Contents 22 The Prehistory of North Africa 568 liters BALOUD 23 The Prehistory of the Sahara 585 HJHUGOT 24 The Prehistory of West Africa 611 CT Shaw 25 Prehistory in the Nile Valley 634 F. de Bono 26 African Prehistoric Art 656 Giles K.I. ZRBO 27 Origins, Development and Expansion of Agricultural 687 Techniques are Porters and JBRRAU 28 Discovery and Diffusion of Metals and Development of Social Systems up to the 5th century before our era 706 Giles DRCOUT Your Conclusion, From Nature. In the Raw to Liberated Humanity 730 Giles K.I. ZRBO List of members of the International Scientific Committee for the Drafting of a General History of Africa 747 Biographies of Authors 749 Bibliographies 753 Indexes 801 Then, B. Mrs. Catherine Pearls contributed to the finalization of chapters 18, 19, 20, 21 and 24. Mrs. Helen Roche provided some additional items of information to chapter 19. VN List of figures 12.I Diagrammatic Language Map of Africa 310 13.I Physical Map of Africa 317 14.1 Mineral Resources of Africa 330 to 16.1 Graphs showing analogies between oxygen isotopes or temperature variations and the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field 373 16.2 Graphs showing analogies between temperatures indicated by the microfauna and the magnetic inclination for the last 2 million years 374 16.3 Surface water isotherm map of the Atlantic Ocean for February, 18,000 B page 380 16.4 M The P showing differences in surface water temperature of the Atlantic Ocean in the winter, between 17,000 Oregon 18000 BP and the present. Day 381 16.5 M The P showing differences in surface water temperature of the Atlantic Ocean in summer, between 17,000 Oregon 18000 BP and the present day 382 16.6 Comparative evolution of African lakes over the last 30,000 years 384 16.7 Relative evolution of rainfall evaporation ratio in the Chap Basin by 3 N over the last 12,000 years 387 16.8 Variations in lake level in the Far Basins 38G 16.9 M The P of classical fossil-bearing localities of the Pliocene/Pleistocene era in East Africa 3Q for 16.10 Chronology and the tempo of cultural change during the Pleistocene, in calibration of hominoid evolution 3C5 16.11 Generalized trends in global climate for the past million years J96 16.12 Radiometric and paleomagnetic aspects of the Pliocene/Pleistocene time range in eastern Africa, southwestern Europe and western North America 3Q8 17.1 Paleontological data 416 18.1 Africa, important hominid sites 438 19.1 East Africa, important Stone Age sites 461 19.2 Early Stone Age, first phase. Typical old owl and pebble tools 467 19.3 A Early Stone Age, second phase. Typical issue on hand axe 46G 19.3 B Early Stone Age, second phase. Typical issue on pick 470 19.3 C Early Stone Age, second phase. Typical issue on cleaver 471 19.4 Middle Stone Age and transitional tools 474 19.5 Late Stone Age, thumbnail scraper, backed blade and crescent 477 20.1 Late Pliocene/earlier Pleistocene main faunal and fossil man localities in southern Africa 488 20.2. Lower issue on hand axe, flank and 2 core choppers from the middle breccia. Stirk Fonte 4G 20.3 DHE distribution of Acheulean sites in southern Africa. 4G 720.4 Upper Acheulean tools from Kalambo Falls, Zambia. 4Q 820.5 wood and implements from Pleistocene sites in southern Africa. Joy 20.6 The distribution of Forelsmith and Sandgolern sites in southern Africa. 507 by X. List of figures. 20.7 Artifacts from Sandgolern assemblages in the Zambesi Valley, near Livingstone, Zambia. 50G 20.8 Upper Pleistocene and some post-Pleistocene fossil MDN sites in southern Africa. 512 20.9 Tools of the Petersburg and Bamda industries from the Cave of Hearts, Transvaal, and Bamda Cave, Zimbabwe. 5 Slash for 20.10 Middle Stone Age industry from Twin Rivers, typical of the Brachystegia woodlands of Zambia. 51G 20.11 Middle Stone Age artifacts from Whitcross Cave, typical of the equipment of hunters in the Karoo/Kalahari Thornfeldy. 20.12 Tools of the Middle Stone Age Loop and Band Industrial Complex from Kalambo Falls, associated with Brachystegia woodland and evergreen forest. 521 20.13 Distribution of utilized blades and blade fragments in relation to dolerite boulder structures on a living site at Orange, Orange Free State. 522 20.14 Tools from Hauiasin's port sites belonging to Group IV of the Middle Stone Age in southern Africa. 523 20.5 Tools of the Later Stone Age Wilton Complex. 526 20.16 Crescent adze plane or scraper in shirt, mounted in mastic, with rhino horn handle, from a cave at Plettenberg Bay, Eastern Cape Province, South Africa. 52J 21.1 Central Africa. Places mentioned in the text. 535 21.2 Central Africa. Vegetation zones. 536 23.1 Principal sites of Saharan paintings and pack engravings. 9 degrees 23.2 Pottery from Akrijat, Mauritania. SG 824.1 West Africa. Vegetation zones. 612 27.1 Latitudinal zoning. The African continent. 6 Go 27.2 Ecosystems of the African continent. 6Gi 27.3 Cradles of African agriculture. 6G 627.4 Geocultural sketch MP of Africa. 702 X. List of plates. 2.1 Bronze statue representing the dynastic power of the Songhai of Dark All S. 3 4.1 Bas relief from Abomi Museum 86. 5.1 Verso of Arabic manuscript. 113. 6.1 Facsimile of BMUM manuscript. 146.2 Facsimile of Hausa manuscript. 141. 6.3 Facsimile of manuscript. 141. 8.1 Valaha player. 204. 8.2 M the singer. 204. 8.3 Griot who to miming the fallen MWM by $20. 8.4 to color musician playing the Arden. 205. 9.1 X-ray photograph of the frontal chest of the MUMMY of Queen Nejmer 21st dynasty. 230 to 9.2 Microphoto of a section in a copper staple from the Cheops boat at Giza. 230 to 9.3 Glass frit block showing the flat upper surface, lateral sides and a part of the fritting crucible left adhering to the right side. 230 to 9.40 The bottom part of one of the sandstone columns, Buhan Temple, Sudan. 230 to 0.1 The Serpent King Steel. 256 0.2 The Recade dedicated to King Dokdonu, first sovereign of Dangsholm. 256 0.3 Inspiring lion cub from Abomi Museum. 256 0.4 The Recade showing a gourd, symbol of power, from Abomi Museum. 257 0.5 First page of the first chapter of the Koran. 257 0.6 Phonetic chart of characters. 257 0.7 Sample characters from the indigenous scripts. 258 0.8 DHEMUM graphic system. 259 0.9 The Egyptian and West African graphic systems. 259 0.10 The palette of Narmer. 261.1 Moroccan. 287 1.2 Algerian woman and baby. 287 1.3 Hittite woman from Idols, Algeria. 287 1.4 Fulani WOMEN from near Gaouabule, Cameroon. 288 1.5 Fulani WOMEN. 288 1.6 Sarakol woman, Mauritania. 288 1.7 Chief, Nomad, Mauritania 288 1.8 Young Fulani girl from Mali 289 1.9 Voltaire 289 1.10 Germasong HEWOMEN from Balayra, Niger 289 1.11 Tuareg child from Agades, Niger 289 1.1 Deborah Fulani WOMEN from Kaba, Niger 291.13 TWA Pygmy, Rwanda 290. 1.1 for Zulu WOMEN 290. XI. List of plates 11.15 Pygmy from the Congo to go 11.16 N group to GI 7. One of the oldest stone artifacts in the world, found on the Ombo site, Ethiopia 427 17.2 The Silex excavation, North Pakistan 427 17.3 Eocene and Oligocene sites, Fayum, Egypt 428 17.4 Reconstruction of the environment at Fayum, Egypt, 40 million years ago 428 17.5 Skulls of Australopithecus robustus and Australopithecus gracilis 42 G 17.6 Skull of Australopithecus boise, Ombo site, Ethiopia 42 G 17.7 Skull of Homo habilis 430 17.8 and the Skull of Homo erectus from Shaokaoxian, China reconstruction 430 to 117.9 Reconstruction of the environment in which Homo erectus lived at Shaokaoxian, China, for 0,000 years ago 431 17.10 Skulls of Australopithecus africanus 431 17.11 Reconstruction of Ardipithecus bambili 430 to 17.12 Skeleton of Ardipithecus bambili, 12 million years old, found on the Grosseto site, Tuscany 430 to 17.13 Skull of Cro-Magnoid from Afalu, Algeria 433 17.1 for reconstruction of Skull of Ramapithecus 433 17.15 The Afar site, Ethiopia 433 17.16 The Ombo sites and paleontological excavations during the 1969 French expedition 430 for 17.17 Oldaway Gorge, Northern Tanzania 43s 17.18 The An excavation site at Oldaway 436 17.19 Detail of the surface of the soil at the Oldaway excavations 436 17.20 Close-up of the surface of the soil at the Oldaway excavations 436 18.1 Australopithecus boise, lateral view of cranium from Oldaway Gorge, Tanzania 44 G 18.2 Australopithecus boise, occlusal view of mandible from Kubithora, Kenya 44 G 18.3 Australopithecus africanus, lateral view of cranium from Kubithora, Kenya 44 G 18.4 Australopithecus africanus, occlusal view of mandible from Kubithora, Kenya 44 G 18.5 Homo erectus, lateral view of cranium from Kubithora, Kenya 450 18.6 Homo habilis, lateral view of cranium from Kubithora, Kenya 450 19.1 Oldaway Gorge, Northern Tanzania 485 19.2 Ismail, Southern Highlands of Tanzania 485 19.3 Ismail, Tanzania. A concentration of Acheulean hand axes, cleavers and other tools 485 19.40 Lergy Salient in the Kenyan Rift Valley 486 19.5 Apis Rock Maze from Northern Tanzania 486 21.1 Upper Acheulean beak-faced tool from the river Entjobert, Upper Sunga, Central African Republic 567 21.2 Upper Acheulean hand axe from the river Entjobert, Upper Sunga, Central African Republic 567 21.3 Flat-bottomed Neolithic vase from Butalamo, Lobade, Central African Republic 567 XII. List of plates 21.4 Metallithic monument in the Bor region, Central African Republic 567 22.1 Pebbles fashioned into beak-faced tools and a chopper, from Inhanak 581 22.2 Spherical faceted pebbles from Inhanak 581 22.3 The development of pebble culture toward the Acheulean shapes 581 22.4 Hand axe found on the Acheulean site of Ergatihudain, Algerian Sahara 582 22.5 Beak-faced Acheulean tool, the most advanced implement found on the Ternafine site in western Algeria 582 22.6 Mousterian pointed tool from Elgir, Tunisia 8222.78 Iran tools, pedunculated points, scrapers and leveloids cores 8322.8 typical Capsian industry 583. 22.9 of per Capsian industry, scalene triangles, trapeziums, saws, groove knives, burins, micro-burins, drillers, scrapers, etc. 583.22.10 upper Capsian industry, geometrical microliths trapeziums, scalene triangles, crescents and micro-burins JSJ 22.11 upper Capsian, human fibula fashioned into a dagger, found at Mekter El Arb. Eastern Algeria 584.22.12 upper Capsian, engraved limestone plaquette from Kangwet El Muaid, Eastern Algeria 584.22.13 Neolithic Capsian tradition, pestle and mortar showing traces of coal poker and fragments of helix shells, found at the Mout El Amr, Eastern Algeria 584.23.1 flat notched axe from Gassalarum, Niger 606.23.2 cleaver from Tien Asako. Mali 606.23.3 chopper tool pebble culture from Aleph, Algerian Sahara 606.23.4 chopper tool pebble culture from Aleph, Algerian Sahara 606.23.5 lower Paleolithic hand axe from Capri Edgat, Algerian Sahara 607.23.6 lower Paleolithic cleaver from Capri Edgat, Algerian Sahara 607.23.7 large bifacial double point, Atiran industry, from Timi Mount. Algerian Sahara 607.23.8 written points from Aleph, Algerian Sahara 608.23.9 written bifacial double point from Abu Bay, Niger 6og 23.10 Neolithic pottery from Dartiship, Mauritania 609.23.11 Neolithic arrowheads from Ingezam, Niger 610.23.1 to Neolithic group tax from Adarbouz. Niger 610.23.13 Neolithic polished axe from the Faya region, Chad Bio 24.1 Industry of Cape Manuel, Senegal 631.24.2 Stone pendants basalt from the Neolithic site at Patdoy 631.24.3 Neolithic Bel Air pottery from the Diakite site, Senegal 631.24.4 Pottery of Cape Manuel, Senegal, decorated fragments. 631.24.5 Megalithic Circle, Tiken Bousseri, Senegal 632.24.6 Bel Air polished axes made of dolerite 632.24.7 Millstone made of volcanic rock, found on the Neolithic site of Ngir 632.24.8 Iron Age flat-bottomed pot 633.24.9 Bone smoothing tool, found on the Neolithic site at Cape Manuel, Senegal. 633.24.10 Anthropomorphic statue found on thyroid site, Senegal 633.25.1 Flint javelin heads from Murchison, Sudan 655.25.2 The Valley of the Queens 655. XLLL. List of plates. 26.1 Detail from the White Lady Cave Painting, South Africa 680-26.2 Serpent's Track Cave Painting 680-26.3 Engraving of Rhinoceros, Blake AA, Niger 680-26.4 Engraving of an Elephant, Niker, Algerian Sahara 683-26.5 Bovine, Timber Rose, Mali 683-26.6 Gazelles, Blake AA, Niger 683-26.7 Cave Engraving, Upper Volta. 683.26.8 Close-up of cave engravings, Upper Volta 684.26.9 Erotic scene, Tessali, Algeria 684.26.10 Erotic scene, Tessali, Algeria 684.26.11 Cave painting, Tibesti, Chad 684.26.12 Cave paintings, Tessali, Algeria 68J 26.13 Cave paintings, Namibia 686.27.1 Topsoil firing, Fura de Jalan 703.27.2 The Salvor. Spade of the Sirer Nominka, Senegal 703.27.3 Cultivation of land, Kabayandu 704.27.4 Artificial islands for the cultivation of rice, Guinea-Bissau 704.27.5 Rice pits, Nyassa, Cosimans 705.28.1 TOMB of Huey, after art. Let's see you 70 to G 28.2 TOMB of Reek Mile Re at Thebes 70 to G 28.3 Copper Statue of Pepi I Old Kingdom 70 to C 28.4 Razor, Mergis 70 to G Conclude. 1 Laboratory set up at Rosobithi for investigating the development of the delta of the river Senegal $74 Conclude. 2 Skull of Australopithecus boise from the OMO site, Ethiopia 745. XIV. List of tables. 5.1 Chronological Table of Principal Written Sources 100 to 257.1 Basic Forms of Oral Traditions 145 12.1 Stages of the Greenberg Classification 308 16.1 The HE Succession of the Recognized Formations and Their Chronology 393 18.1 List of Homo erectus materials known from Africa 448 19.1 Periods and Industries in African Prehistory 451 19.2 Prehistory in East Africa 464 21.1 Climatic Variations and Prehistoric Traditions of the Congo Basin 532 21.2 The Names of the Industries, Present Carbon 14 Dating and the Evolution of the Environment and Flora 533 23.1 Outline of Saharan Prehistoric Chronology 600 XV. Preface. Amadoutham Ahtarmbow Director General of UNESCO. For a long time, all kinds of myths and prejudices concealed the true history of Africa from the world at large. African societies were looked upon as societies that could have no history. In spite of important work done by such pioneers as Leo Frodenis, Maurice Delafosse and Arturo Labriola, as early as the first decades of this century, a great many non-African experts could not rid themselves of certain preconceptions and argued that the lack of written sources and documents made it impossible to engage in any scientific study of such societies. Although the Iliad and Odyssey were rightly regarded as essential sources for the history of ancient Greece, African oral tradition, the collective memory of peoples which holds the thread of many events marking their lives, was rejected as worthless. In writing the history of a large part of Africa, the only sources used were from outside the continent, and the final product gave a picture not so much of the paths actually taken by the African peoples as of those that the authors thought they must have taken. Since the European Middle Ages were often used as a yardstick, modes of production, social relations and political institutions were visualized only by reference to the European past. In fact, there was a refusal to see Africans as the creators of original cultures which flowered and survived over the centuries in patterns of their own making and which historians are unable to grasp unless they forego their prejudices and rethink their approach. Furthermore, the continent of Africa was hardly ever looked upon as a historical entity. On the contrary, emphasis was laid on everything likely to lend credence to the idea that a split had existed, from time immemorial, between a white Africa and a black Africa, each unaware of the other's existence. The Sahara was often presented as an impenetrable space preventing any intermingling of ethnic groups and peoples or any exchange of goods, beliefs, customs and ideas between the societies that had grown up on either side of the desert. Hermetic frontiers were drawn between the civilizations of ancient Egypt and Nubia and those of the people south of the Sahara. It is true that the history of Africa north of the Sahara has been more prefaced closely linked with that of the Mediterranean basin than has the history of sub-Saharan Africa, but it is now widely recognized that the various civilizations of the African continent, for all their differing languages and cultures, represent, to a greater or lesser degree, the historical offshoots of a set of peoples and societies united by bonds centuries old. Another phenomenon which did great disservice to the objective study of the African past was the appearance, with the slave trade and colonization, of racial stereotypes which bred contempt and lack of understanding and became so deep-rooted that they distorted even the basic concepts of historiography. From the time when the notions of white and black were used as generic labels by the colonialists, WHO were regarded as superior, the colonized Africans had to struggle against both economic and psychological enslavement. Africans were identifiable by the color of their skin, they had become the kind of merchandise, they were earmarked for hard labor and eventually, in the minds of those dominating them, they came to symbolize an imaginary and allegedly inferior Negro race. This pattern of spurious identification relegated the history of the African peoples in many minds to the rank of ethno-history, in which appreciation of the historical and cultural facts was bound to be warped. The situation has changed significantly since the end of the Second World War, and in particular since the African countries became independent and began to take an active part in the life of the international community and in the mutual exchanges that are its raison d'etre. An increasing number of historians has endeavored to tackle the study of Africa with a more rigorous, objective and open-minded outlook by using, with all due precautions, actual African sources. In exercising their right to take the historical initiative, Africans themselves have felt a deep-seated need to re-establish the historical authenticity of their societies on solid foundations. In this context, the importance of the 8-volume General History of Africa, which UNESCO is publishing, speaks for itself. The experts from many countries working on this project began by laying down the theoretical and methodological basis for the history. They have been at pains to call in question the oversimplifications arising from a linear and restrictive conception of world history and to re-establish the true facts wherever necessary and possible. They have endeavored to highlight the historical data that give a clearer picture of the evolution of the different peoples of Africa in their specific socio-cultural setting. To tackle this huge task, made all the more complex and difficult by the vast range of sources and the fact that documents were widely scattered, UNESCO has had to proceed by stages. The first stage, from 1965 to 1969, was devoted to gathering documentation and planning the work. Operational assignments were conducted in the field and included campaigns to collect oral traditions, the creation of regional documentation centers for oral traditions, the collection of unpublished manuscripts in XELLL, preface, Arabic and Ajami African languages written in Arabic script, the compilation of archival inventories and the preparation of a guide to the sources of the history of Africa, culled from the archives and libraries of the countries of Europe and later published in 9 volumes. In addition, meetings were organized to enable experts from Africa and other continents to discuss questions of methodology and lay down the broad lines for the project after careful examination of the available sources. The second stage, which lasted from 1969 to 1971, was devoted to shaping the history and linking its different parts. The purpose of the international meetings of experts held in Paris in 1969 and Addis Ababa in 1970 was to study and define the problems involved in drafting and publishing the history, presentation in 8 volumes, the principal edition in English, French and Arabic, translation into African languages, such as Kiswahili, Hausa, Fulani, Yoruba or Lila, prospective versions in German, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish and Chinese, as well as abridged editions designed for a wide African and international public. The third stage has involved actual drafting and publication. This began with the appointment of the 39-member International Scientific Committee, 2/3 African and 1/3 non-African, which assumes intellectual responsibility for the history. The method used is interdisciplinary and is based on a multifaceted approach and a wide variety of sources. The first among these is archaeology, which holds many of the keys to the history of African cultures and civilizations. Thanks to archaeology, it is now acknowledged that Africa was very probably the cradle of mankind and the scene, in the Neolithic period, of one of the first technological revolutions in history. Archaeology has also shown that Egypt was the setting for one of the most brilliant ancient civilizations of the world. But another very important source is oral tradition, which, after being long despised, has now emerged as an invaluable instrument for discovering the history of Africa, making it possible to follow the movements of its different peoples in both space and time, to understand the African vision of the world from the inside and to grasp the original features of the values on which the cultures and institutions of the continent are based. We are indebted to the International Scientific Committee in charge of this general history of Africa, and to its rapporteur and the editors and authors of the various volumes and chapters, for having shed the new light on the African past in its authentic and all-encompassing form and for having avoided any dogmatism in the study of essential issues. Beyond these issues we might cite the slave trade, that endlessly bleeding wound, which was responsible for one of the cruelest mass deportations in the history of mankind, which sacked the African continent of its lifeblood while contributing significantly to the economic and commercial expansion of Europe. Colonization, with all the effects it had on population, economics, psychology and culture, relations between Africa south of the Sahara and XIX. Preface. The Arab world, and Finally, the process of decolonization and nation-building which mobilized the intelligence and passion of people still alive and sometimes still active today. All these issues have been broached with a concern for honesty and rigor which is not the least of the history's merits. By taking stock of our knowledge of Africa, putting forward the variety of viewpoints on African cultures and offering a new reading of history, the history has the signal advantage of showing up the light and shade and of openly portraying the differences of opinion that may exist between scholars. By demonstrating the inadequacy of the methodological approaches which have long been used in research on Africa, this history calls for a new and careful study of the twofold problem areas of historiography and cultural identity, which are united by links of reciprocity. Like any historical work of value, the history paves the way for a great deal of further research on a variety of topics. It is for this reason that the International Scientific Committee, in close collaboration with UNESCO, decided to embark on additional studies in an attempt to go deeper into a number of issues which will permit the clearer understanding of certain aspects of the African past. The HE findings being published in the series UNESCO Studies and Documents, General History of Africa will prove a useful supplement to the history, as will the works planned on aspects of national or sub-regional history. The general history sheds light both on the historical unity of Africa and also its relations with the other continents, particularly the Americas and the Caribbean. For a long time, the creative manifestations of the descendants of Africans in the Americas were lumped together by some historians as a heterogeneous collection of Africanisms. Needless to say, this is not the attitude of the authors of the history, in which the resistance of the slaves shipped to America, the constant and massive participation of the descendants of Africans in the struggles for the initial independence of America and in national liberation movements, are rightly perceived for what they were, vigorous assertions of identity, which helped forge the universal concept of mankind. Although the phenomenon may vary in different places, it is now quite clear that ways of feeling, thinking, dreaming and acting in certain nations of the Western Hemisphere have been marked by their African heritage. The cultural inheritance of Africa is visible everywhere, from the southern United States to northern Brazil, across the Caribbean and on the Pacific seaboard. In certain places it even underpins the cultural identity of some of the most important elements of the population. The history also clearly brings out Africa's relations with southern Asia across the Indian Ocean and the African contributions to other civilizations through mutual exchanges. I am convinced that the efforts of the peoples of Africa to conquer or strengthen their independence, secure their development and assert their precious cultural characteristics, must be rooted in historical awareness renewed, keenly felt and taken up by each succeeding generation. MYOW and background. The experience I gained as a teacher and as chairman, from the early days of independence, of the first commission set up to reform history and geography curricula in some of the countries of West and Central Africa, taught them how necessary it was for the education of young people and for the information of the public at large to have a history book produced by scholars with inside knowledge of the problems and hopes of Africa and with the ability to apprehend the continent in its entirety. For all these reasons, UNESCO's goal will be to ensure that this general history of Africa is widely disseminated in a large number of languages and is used as a basis for producing children's books, school textbooks and radio and television programs. Young people, whether school children or students, and adults in Africa and elsewhere will thus be able to form a truer picture of the African continent's past and the factors that explain it, as well as a fairer understanding of its cultural heritage and its contribution to the general progress of mankind. The history should thus contribute to improved international cooperation and stronger solidarity among peoples in their aspirations to justice, progress and peace. This is, at least, MY most cherished hope. It remains for ME to express MY deep gratitude to the members of the International Scientific Committee, the rapporteur, the different volume editors, the authors and all those who have collaborated in this tremendous undertaking. The HE work they have accomplished and the contribution they have made plainly go to show how people from different backgrounds but all imbued with the same spirit of goodwill and enthusiasm in the service of universal truth can, within the international framework provided by UNESCO, bring to fruition a project of considerable scientific and cultural import. My thanks also go to the organizations and governments whose generosity has made it possible for UNESCO to publish this history in different languages and thus ensure that it will have the worldwide impact it deserves and thereby serve the international community as a whole. XXI. Description of the project. PAOGOT. President, International Scientific Committee for the Directing of a General History of Africa. The HE General Conference of UNESCO at its 16th session instructed the Director General to undertake the directing of a general history of Africa. The HE enormous task of implementing the project was entrusted to an international scientific committee which was established by the Executive Board in 1970. This committee, under the statutes adopted by the Executive Board of UNESCO in 1971, is composed of 39 members. 2/3 of WHOM are African and 1/3 non-African, serving in their personal capacity and appointed by the Director General of UNESCO for the duration of the committee's mandate. The HE first task of the committee was to define the principal characteristics of the work. These were defined at the first session of the committee as follows. Although aiming at the highest possible scientific level, the history does not seek to be exhaustive and is a work of synthesis avoiding dogmatism. In many respects, it is a statement of problems showing the present state of knowledge and the main trends in research, and it does not hesitate to show divergencies of views where these exist. In this way, it prepares the ground for future work. The Africa is considered in this work as a totality. The HE aim is to show the historical relationships between the various parts of the continent, too frequently subdivided in works published to date. Africa's historical connections with the other continents receive due attention, these connections being analyzed in terms of mutual exchanges and multilateral influences, bringing out, in its appropriate light, Africa's contribution to the history of mankind. See, the general history of Africa is, in particular, a history of ideas and civilizations, societies and institutions. It is based on a wide variety of sources, including oral tradition and art forms. DDHE history is viewed essentially from the inside. Although a scholarly work, it is also, in large measure, a faithful reflection of the way in which African authors view their own civilization. While prepared in an international framework and drawing to the full on the present stock of scientific knowledge, it should also be a vitally important element in the recognition. XXLLL. Description of the project. Of the African heritage and should bring out the factors making for unity in the continent. This effort to view things from within is the novel feature of the project and should, in addition to its scientific quality, give it great topical significance. By showing the true face of Africa, the history could, in an era absorbed in economic and technical struggles, offer a particular conception of human values. The committee has decided to present the work covering over 3 million years of African history in 8 volumes, each containing about 800 pages of text with illustrations, photographs, maps and line drawings. The chief editor, assisted if necessary by 1 or 2 co-editors, is responsible for the preparation of each volume. The editors are elected by the COM, either from among its members or from outside by a 2/3 majority. They are responsible for preparing the volumes in accordance with the decisions and plans adopted by the committee. Scientific matters, they are accountable to the committee or, between 2 sessions of the committee, to its bureau for the contents of the volumes, the final version of the texts, the illustrations and, in general, for all scientific and technical aspects of the history. The bureau ultimately approves the final manuscript. Then it considers the manuscript ready for publication. It transmits it to the Director General of UNESCO. Thus the committee, or the bureau between committee sessions, remains fully in charge of the project. Each volume consists of some 30 chapters. Each chapter is the work of a principal author assisted, if necessary, by 1 or 2 collaborators. The authors are selected by the committee on the basis of their curricula vitae. Preference is given to African authors, provided they have requisite qualifications. Special effort is also made to ensure, as far as possible, that all regions of the continent, as well as other regions having historical or cultural ties with Africa, are equitably represented among the authors. WHEN the editor of a volume has approved texts of chapters, they are then sent to all members of the committee for criticism. In addition, the text of the volume editor is submitted for examination to a reading committee, set up within the International Scientific Committee on the basis of the members' fields of competence. The HE Reading Committee analyzes the chapters from the standpoint of both substance and form. The Bureau then gives final approval to the manuscripts. Such a seemingly long and involved procedure has proved necessary, since it provides the best possible guarantee of the scientific objectivity of the general history of Africa. There have, in fact, been instances when the Bureau has rejected manuscripts or insisted on major revisions or even reassigned the directing of a chapter to another author. Occasionally, specialists in a particular period of history or in a particular question are consulted to put the finishing touches to a volume. XXIV. Description of the project. The work will be published first in a hardcover edition in English, French and Arabic, and later in paperback editions in the same languages. The unabridged version in English and French will serve as a basis for translation into African languages. The committee has chosen Kiswahili and Hausa as the first African languages into which the work will be translated. Also, every effort will be made to ensure publication of the general history of Africa in other languages of wide international currency such as Chinese, Portuguese, Russian, German, Italian, Spanish, Japanese, etc. It is thus evident that this is a gigantic task which constitutes an immense challenge to African historians and to the scholarly community at large, as well as to UNESCO under whose auspices the work is being done. For the writing of a continental history of Africa, covering the last 3 million years, using the highest canons of scholarship and involving, as it must do, scholars drawn from diverse countries, cultures, ideologies and historical traditions, is surely a complex undertaking. It constitutes a continental, international and interdisciplinary project of great proportions. In conclusion, I would like to underline the significance of this work for Africa and for the world. At a time when the peoples of Africa are striving toward unity and greater cooperation in shaping their individual destinies, a proper understanding of Africa's past, with an awareness of COMMON ties among Africans and between Africa and other continents, should not only be a major contribution towards mutual understanding among the people of the earth, but also a source of knowledge of a cultural heritage that belongs to all mankind. XXV. Note on chronology. It has been agreed to adopt the following method for writing dates. With regard to prehistory, dates may be written in two different ways. One way is by reference to the present era, that is, dates BP before present, the reference year being plus 1950. All dates are negative in relation to plus 1950. The other way is by reference to the beginning of the Christian era. Dates are represented in relation to the Christian era by a simple plus or sign before the date. WHEN referring to centuries, the terms BC and AD are replaced by before our era and of our era. Some examples are as follows. I-2300 BP equals 350 U-2900 BC equals 2900 180 equals plus 180 I 5th century BC equals 5th century before our era 3rd century AD equals 3rd century of our era. XXELL. General Introduction. J. K. I. Z. R. B. O. Africa * has a history. The time has long gone by when maps and portulains had great empty spaces representing the African continent as marginal and subordinate, and the knowledge of scholars on the subject was summed up in the cryptic phrase which perhaps tried to offer its own excuse, "Ibi suddenly owns, here, the lions." But then came the discovery of the mines and their profits, and incidentally of the native. Note by the VOLUM editor. The origin of the word Africa has been difficult to elucidate. It became the accepted term from Roman times onwards in the form Africa, replacing the originally Greek or Egyptian word Libya, the land of the Libyans or the Lubans in Genesis. From designating the North African coast, the word Africa came to be applied to the whole continent from the end of the 1st century before our era. But what was the original meaning of the name? Starting with the most likely explanations, the following versions have been proposed. The word Africa is thought to come from the name of a Berber people who lived to the south of Carthage, the Afariq or Arica, whence Africa or Africa to denote the land of the Afariq. Another derivation of the word Africa is that it comes from two Phoenician terms, one of which means an ear of corn, the fertility symbol in that region, and the other, Fatarkia, means a land of fruit. It is further suggested that the word comes from the Latin adjective aprica sunny or the Greek aprot free from cold. Another origin might be the Phoenician root theraculate, which suggests the idea of separation or in other words diaspora. It may be pointed out that the same root is to be found in some African languages, for instance Bambara. In Sanskrit and Hindi the root of era or Africa denotes that which, in geographical terms, comes after, in other words the West. Africa is the western continent. The historical tradition subscribed to by Leo Africanus has it that a Yemenite chief named Africus invaded North Africa in the second millennium before our era and founded the town called Africa. But it is more likely that the Arabic term Afriqiya is the Arabic transliteration of the word Africa. One version even suggests that Afar was a grandson of Abraham and companion of Hercules.